The air in the conference room tastes like stale coffee and fear. My fear. His. We are here. All of us. Lawyers on both sides, their faces impassive masks. The appraiser stands by the projector, a sheaf of papers clutched in his hand like a holy text. My ex-husband, Mark, sits across the polished table, his face a mask too, but one I know intimately.
Smug.
Confident. Like a king surveying empty lands. He believes he's already won. Believes he's stripped me bare. Believes I have nothing. He said the words himself, just months ago. You have nothing left, the phrase echoes in this sterile room, bouncing off the beige walls, settling heavy in the silence. The only sound is the hum of the ancient fluorescent lights above. I watch the appraiser. His gaze flicks between the papers and Mark, then to me. A flicker of something? Pity? Recognition? Amusement? My heart hammers against my ribs, a trapped bird. This is it. The number. The official, irrefutable number that will quantify the impossible. That will prove him wrong.
Or prove him right.
The silence stretches, thin and brittle. My palms are slick. My gaze drifts to Mark. He catches my eye, offers a slow, condescending smile. He thinks I'm nervous about the pittance I'll receive. He thinks I'm about to collapse. He has no idea. He truly has no idea what I've built in the ruins he left behind. The appraiser clears his throat. The sound is deafening in the quiet room. He looks at Mark, then directly at me. He opens his mouth to speak the number. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. My life, just a year ago, felt like a perfectly curated museum exhibit. Glass cases, velvet ropes, everything in its designated place. My place was beside Mark. Behind Mark, really. He was the architect of our world, the driving force, the man with the vision, the money, the power. I was the elegant frame around his portrait. We lived in the kind of house that graced magazine covers, clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, a sprawling garden that always seemed to be in perpetual, effortless bloom thanks to an unseen army of landscapers. My days were a soft blur of charity luncheons, managing household staff, and maintaining the serene atmosphere Mark expected when he finally returned home, tired but triumphant, from the relentless battlefield of his business world. I was good at it. I made his life easy. I anticipated his needs, smoothed over the small domestic bumps, presented a calm, beautiful front to the world. I wasn't a prisoner, not exactly. I had freedom within the gilded cage. Unlimited credit cards, a luxury car, access to exclusive clubs. But freedom to be? To do? That was a concept I hadn't explored in years. Mark didn't discourage my interests, he just dismissed them. My love for intricate patterns, for crafting things with my hands, for finding beauty in discarded or overlooked details, he saw it as a quaint hobby, a wifely distraction. He'd pat my head, metaphorically speaking, and tell me it was nice I had something to keep me busy. He was building empires. I was arranging flowers. Or so he thought. My hobby was small, private. It started years ago, a quiet escape in the evenings after the house was quiet, after Mark was asleep or engrossed in work. I began creating unique digital designs, complex patterns, intricate textures, things that didn't exist anywhere else. It was purely for myself at first, a creative outlet, a place where I could build something that was entirely mine. I never showed them to anyone but Mark, and his reaction was always the same. A cursory glance, a polite nod, a comment about how clever I was with computers. He didn't understand it. He didn't see it. To him, it was invisible work, without tangible value, like dusting or making sure his shirts were perfectly pressed. Necessary for the smooth operation of his world, but not something that commanded respect or significant thought. It was my secret garden, protected by his indifference. Then came the day the glass shattered. There was no fight.
No dramatic confrontation.
Just a quiet Tuesday evening, the kind where the setting sun bathed the living room in a warm, false glow. Mark came home, earlier than usual. He sat me down on the sofa, not across from him, but beside him, which should have been a sign. He took my hand, something he hadn't done spontaneously in years. His voice was soft, almost gentle, which was the most chilling part. He spoke about diverging paths, about wanting different things, about how our lives had grown apart. It was the standard script. But then he leaned in, his eyes cold and sharp, and delivered the line that would become the foundation of my next life. "I've had the lawyers draw up the papers," he said, squeezing my hand just a little too tightly. "It's simple.
Clean.
I'll take care of everything." He paused, letting his words sink in. "You'll be fine.
You have.
You have nothing of your own, really. No career. No assets tied directly to you. It makes this much simpler. You have nothing left to complicate things. Nothing left." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Not just nothing in terms of money or property, but nothing in terms of worth. Nothing I had built. Nothing. I was independent of him. In his eyes, my entire existence was a satellite orbiting his sun. Remove the sun, and the satellite simply ceased to be. It had no orbit of its own. The world tilted. The comfortable sofa felt like crumbling stone. Nothing left. The quiet hobby, the designs, the patterns, the hours poured into creating something just for the sake of creating. He didn't even count that as something. It was less than nothing. It was air. The days and weeks that followed were a blur of cold offices, confusing legal jargon, and the gnawing realization of just how true his words felt in the immediate aftermath. My access to funds was restricted. The house felt alien, no longer mine, just a temporary shelter before I was cast out. His lawyers were deficient, relentless. They painted a picture of me as a dependent, a woman who had contributed nothing tangible to the marital estate. Years of managing a complex household, of supporting his demanding life, of being the silent partner in his public image. None of it mattered. They reduced me to a line item, an expense. My own lawyer, a kind but weary woman named Sarah, laid out my options, limited as they were. Mark had been meticulous in shielding his assets, setting up trusts, structuring his businesses. Everything was in his name, or corporate names I barely understood. My nothing left wasn't just an insult. It was a legal reality he had engineered over years. I tried to talk about my designs, my digital patterns. Sarah listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she gently explained that unless this hobby had generated significant income or had demonstrable market value, it wouldn't be considered a substantial asset in the divorce proceedings. It was classified as personal property, perhaps like my clothes or jewelry. Its value was negligible in the eyes of the court.
Mark was right.
It was nothing. The early struggles were basic. Learning to budget. Navigating public transport after years of a private car and driver. Finding a small, anonymous apartment that felt cramped and temporary compared to the sprawling elegance I had known. The emotional struggle was worse. The feeling of worthlessness that Mark's words had embedded deep within me. Every setback, every financial worry, every dismissive email from his legal team felt like a confirmation. See? He was right. You can't manage on your own. You are nothing without him. I neglected my design work. It felt pointless now. A silly pastime for a woman who had too much time and too much money, neither of which I had anymore. The creative impulse withered under the harsh light of reality. Survival became the only focus. Finding a job, any job that could provide a steady income. But what skills did I have, according to the world Mark inhabited? Hostessing? Event planning? Managing staff? Those weren't seen as transferable skills in the cutthroat corporate world. The legal battle intensified. Mark wasn't content with just divorcing me. He wanted to make it hurt. He wanted to prove his point. His lawyers contested every reasonable request from Sarah. Alimony was fought tooth and nail, framed not as support for a long-term spouse, but as an unnecessary drain on his hard-earned wealth. Property division became a war over every last cent. They dug into my past, looking for anything they could use to discredit me. It was psychological warfare, designed to exhaust me, to break my spirit, to force me to accept whatever pittance they offered. I remember one particular deposition. Mark wasn't there, but his lead attorney, a man with eyes like chipped ice, questioned me for hours. He drilled into my lack of financial contribution, my reliance on Mark's income, the trivial nature of my daily activities. So, your days consisted primarily of managing household staff and attending social events? He'd asked, his voice dripping with condescension. I supported my husband's career, I replied, my voice trembling slightly. I maintained our home. I represented him at events. I provided a stable environment. He cut me off. Let's be clear. You managed employees paid for by Mr. Davies. You attended events funded by Mr. Davies. You lived in a home purchased and maintained by Mr. Davies. Your contributions were, in essence, that of a highly compensated social coordinator. He paused, letting the insult hang. Then he pivoted. And this hobby of yours? These digital patterns. Have you ever sold any of these? Not formally, I admitted. I gave some to friends. Used them for personal projects. So, they generated zero income? Yes, that's correct. And you believe these have some kind of significant value? He asked it like I was delusional.
They are.
They are unique. I stammered. He smiled, a thin, cruel line.
Unique.
Like a child's crayon drawing is unique. Let's move on. That was the moment. The midpoint shift. Sitting in that sterile room, listening to this man, Mark's proxy, dismantle my worth, reduce my entire being to zero income, and like a child's crayon drawing, something inside me snapped. The shame, the fear, the despair, they were suddenly eclipsed by a white-hot anger. An anger so pure and potent it felt like rocket fuel. He thought it was a crayon drawing. He thought it was worthless. They all thought it was nothing. Fine. Let them think that. That evening, back in my cramped apartment, surrounded by unpacked boxes and the heavy air of failure, I opened my laptop for the first time in months. The file folder containing my designs stared back at me. Thousands of hours of work, dismissed as nothing. I didn't just want a fair settlement anymore. I wanted to build something undeniable. Something real. Something that would scream its value so loud they wouldn't be able to ignore it. I wouldn't fight him on his battleground anymore. I would build my own field, cultivate my own harvest, and dare him to say it was nothing when it overshadowed his own kingdom. The next phase was a descent into a new kind of struggle. The legal battle was still raging, a constant drain on my limited resources and emotional energy. Sarah continued to fight for a reasonable settlement, but the offers from Mark's side were insulting. They were clearly waiting for me to fold, to run out of money, to give up. Every letter from their firm felt like a blow, a reminder of my precarious position. Meanwhile, I was pouring every ounce of my being into turning my crayon drawings into a business. My designs weren't just pretty pictures. They were incredibly complex, seamless patterns that could be applied to surfaces, fabrics, digital environments in unique ways. I had developed a style, a technique that was genuinely unique. I saw applications everywhere: high-end textiles, architectural finishes, digital assets for designers and creators. But I knew nothing about business. Nothing about manufacturing, licensing, marketing, sales. I was starting from scratch, armed only with my designs and that burning anger. I spent every waking hour outside of dealing with the divorce proceedings teaching myself. Online courses, library books, reaching out to people on professional networks who knew about niche markets, manufacturing processes. Most people ignored my queries. A few were kind, offering brief advice. One person, a contact from my old social circle who worked in venture capital and had always seemed more interested in innovation than pedigree, agreed to meet for coffee. I showed him my designs, explained my vision for applying them. He was skeptical, but intrigued by the unique aesthetic. He gave me contacts, introduced me to people in the textile and digital asset industries, but warned me it would be an uphill battle. It's niche, he'd said. Could be big, could be nothing. High risk. High risk. Nothing. The words again. I took calculated risks. I used what little savings I had left, money from selling some of my jewelry and designer clothes, the physical remnants of my old life, to build a professional website, create high-quality samples of my designs applied to different materials. I operated out of my tiny apartment, the living room piled high with fabric swatches, design proofs, and business books. I worked late into the night, fueled by instant coffee and sheer determination. The financial pressure was immense. The legal bills mounted. Living expenses were a constant worry. There were days I ate instant noodles for dinner, then sat down to design patterns for luxury textiles. The contrast was stark, almost absurd. I had to keep everything hidden from Mark and his lawyers. Any sign of potential income, any investment, any hint that I was building something with commercial value could be used against me. They could claim it was a marital asset, attempt to seize control, or argue I didn't need alimony because I was clearly capable of supporting myself before the business was even stable. This period was the deepest crisis. I felt utterly alone. I couldn't talk about the business to most people for fear of information leaking. My old friends from the Gilded Cage either pitied me or silently judged my fall from grace. The new people I met in the business world were professional but distant. The legal pressure was relentless. Mark's side presented increasingly low settlement offers, accompanied by thinly veiled threats about dragging out the proceedings for years if I didn't comply. They were using their wealth and power to exhaust me into submission. I was running on fumes. The business was showing tiny signs of life, a few small licensing deals for digital assets, interest from an independent textile company, but it wasn't enough to cover my costs, let alone the legal fees. There was a moment late one night, staring at a stack of bills and a particularly vicious letter from Mark's lawyers, when I felt the despair wash over me completely. It would be so easy to just give up, to accept their pittance, disappear, and try to rebuild a quiet, anonymous life. His words came back. You have nothing left. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was fooling myself. Maybe this was just a more elaborate version of a child's crayon drawing. I stood up and walked to the window. The city lights stretched out below, a vast, impersonal grid. How many people out there were fighting invisible battles, building things in the dark, told they were worth nothing? It wasn't just about the money anymore. It wasn't even just about Mark. It was about proving that I was capable, that creativity, often dismissed, could have real value, that being the wife wasn't the sum total of my potential. I thought about his smug face, his condescending smile, the ease with which he had discarded me and declared me bankrupt, not just financially, but spiritually. The anger, banked but never extinguished, flared again. I wouldn't let him win. I wouldn't let his narrative be my ending. I had nothing to lose by continuing the fight, by going all in on this crazy, impossible dream. If it failed, I was back where I started, with nothing. But if it succeeded, that was the turning point. The moment I stopped just surviving the divorce and started leveraging my hidden potential. I decided to invest everything I had left, financially and emotionally, into the business. I found a small, cutting-edge digital fabrication company willing to work with me on developing new ways to apply my patterns to surfaces. I focused intensely on a specific niche, high-performance, aesthetically unique materials for luxury architectural and design projects. It was a gamble, but if it paid off, the margins were high, and the potential for rapid growth was significant. I also started strategically feeding small, innocuous pieces of information about my design work into the legal discovery process. Not enough to reveal the scale of what I was building, but enough to establish that I was actively pursuing a creative endeavor. My lawyer, Sarah, bless her, understood implicitly when I showed her a sample of a finished material. Her eyes widened.
This
is remarkable, she'd whispered. I explained my plan. Keep it quiet, keep building, and when the time was right, we would reveal its true value. She was nervous. It was an unconventional strategy, but she saw the fire in my eyes. She agreed. The legal battle continued, a relentless storm. Mark's team kept pushing for a low settlement. I kept refusing, citing my need for sufficient support to establish myself. They interpreted this as weakness, as proof I was incapable and desperate. They had no idea that every refusal was a deliberate delay tactic, buying me more time to build my secret weapon. The business grew in fits and starts. Small contracts led to larger ones. My unique patterns gained quiet traction in the design community. I hired a few freelancers, sworn to secrecy about the scope of our work and my personal situation. We were a ghost company, operating below the radar. The financial situation remained tight, but the revenue was finally starting to outpace the expenses, slightly. The future felt less like a dark void and more like a distant, faint light. Then came the phase where everything seemed to fall apart again. A major client, a large architectural firm, suddenly pulled out of a significant project due to internal issues. The revenue hit was devastating. Simultaneously, Mark's lawyers, frustrated by my stubbornness and perhaps sensing something they couldn't quite pinpoint, became exceptionally aggressive. They filed motions questioning my financial disclosures, demanding more detailed accounts of every penny I spent, attempting to paint me as financially irresponsible and incapable. They even tried to subpoena my business records, citing the need to assess my earning potential. This was the deepening crisis. If they saw the business now, in its fragile, barely profitable state after the lost contract, they would dismiss it entirely. It would be exposed before it was strong enough to stand on its own. Or, worse, Mark would see its potential and use his considerable resources to try and seize it or shut it down. The fear was suffocating. I was working around the clock, trying to secure new contracts, manage cash flow, and fend off the legal attacks. It felt like juggling chainsaws while walking a tightrope. I was exhausted, scared, and closer to giving up than I had been since the beginning. Then nothing left, feeling crept back, whispering doubts in the dark. The turning point in this crisis came not from a victory, but from a new threat. Mark's legal team filed a motion to compel a business valuation now, arguing that my design work could be a significant asset and needed to be assessed for the divorce settlement. They weren't doing it because they thought it was valuable. They were doing it as a tactic to disrupt me, to force transparency and likely to prove how little it was worth, thereby reinforcing their argument that I had no independent means and should accept their meager offer. It was a move meant to corner me, to expose my struggling venture and devalue it in one fell swoop. They thought they were pulling the rug out from under me. They didn't know I had built wings. This forced my hand. I couldn't delay the valuation any longer. But the business was in a trough after the lost contract. A valuation now would be disastrous. My only chance was to land a major deal, quickly, that would demonstrate the true potential and market demand for my unique designs. Fueled by a desperate, last-ditch surge of determination, I pitched a massive project to a global luxury hotel chain known for its avant-garde design. It was a long shot. They were looking for something truly innovative, something that would make a statement in their new flagship property. I put everything into that pitch, not just my designs, but the story behind them, the passion, the vision for how they could transform spaces. I talked about the intersection of art and material science, about creating environments that felt utterly unique and emotionally resonant. And they said yes. Not a small pilot project. The whole thing. Exclusive use of my patterns on custom design materials for all surfaces in public spaces and suites. It was an enormous contract, a game changer. The payment terms were favorable, providing immediate capital. More importantly, the prestige of the client validated the business concept in a way nothing else could. The ink on the contract was barely dry when the court-ordered business appraiser contacted me to schedule the valuation. Mark's lawyers were pushing for it to happen immediately. They were so confident they would find a negligible asset, confirming their narrative of my helplessness. They had no idea about the luxury hotel contract. I hadn't disclosed it yet. It was the ace up my sleeve. This brings us back to the conference room. The air thick with unspoken tension. Mark's smug face. The appraiser with his papers. The silence before the number. This was the moment the narrative Mark had so carefully constructed would collide with the reality I had secretly built. The appraiser cleared his throat again. He adjusted his glasses. He looked down at the paper, then up, making eye contact with everyone in the room. Mark leaned forward, a small, expectant smile playing on his lips. He was ready for the valuation of my little hobby business, probably a few $1,000s at best, enough for his lawyers to argue it covered a few months of alimony. We conducted a thorough valuation of my business name. The appraiser began, his voice dry and professional, utterly detached from the human drama unfolding around him. Considering all factors, including current contracts, projected revenue streams based on recent high-profile client acquisition, intellectual property value, and market potential within the luxury design sector. He paused. The silence stretched again, tighter this time. I could feel Mark's impatience, his confidence radiating across the table. His lawyer shifted, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement of anticipation. They were ready for the punchline, the low number that would underscore my supposed lack of capability. The valuation, the appraiser continued, looking directly at Mark, then letting his gaze settle on me, is assessed at $50 million. $50 million. The number landed in the room like a bomb. For a split second, there was absolute silence. A perfect, stunned vacuum. No one moved. No one breathed. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if the number belonged to someone else. $50 million. The nothing left was suddenly worth $50 million. Mark's face. Oh, his face. The smug confidence evaporated instantly, replaced by a look of utter shock, then disbelief.
His jaw went slack.
His eyes, moments ago so sharp and self-assured, widened in stunned incomprehension. He looked like he'd been physically struck. His lead lawyer, the one with the ice eyes, choked. A small, strangled sound. He fumbled with his papers, his practiced composure cracking. And then Mark screamed. It wasn't a word. It was a raw, inarticulate sound of pure rage and disbelief. A guttural bellow that seemed to rip from his very core. What? He roared, slamming his hands down on the table. Papers scattered. That's impossible. What are you talking about? His lawyer scrambled to control him. Mr. Davies, please. One hissed, grabbing his arm. Quiet, Mark, the lead attorney barked, his own face pale. But Mark was beyond control. His face was red, contorted with fury. The mask was gone, replaced by a grotesque mask of someone who had just lost everything he thought he had control over. She had nothing, he screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. That was a hobby. A silly little hobby. Worthless. You said it was worthless. He was yelling at his lawyers now, then back at the appraiser. $50 million. Are you insane? She's worth nothing. Absolutely nothing. The appraiser remained calm, unperturbed by the outburst. Mr. Davies, the valuation is based on standard industry practices, taking into account documented contracts and intellectual property value. The recent contract with luxury hotel chain name alone provides significant validation and a substantial revenue stream. The intellectual property, the unique design algorithms and patterns developed by Ms. Davies, are assessed at considerable value given their exclusivity and market demand. Mark collapsed back in his chair, breathing heavily, his face a picture of shattered reality. He looked at me again, not with contempt this time, but with a look of pure, venomous hatred mixed with bewildered defeat. He had been so certain, so smug in his belief that he had left me with nothing. He had calculated every angle, secured every asset, built his legal fortress. And I, the woman he had dismissed as having nothing left, had built a $50 million empire under his nose, using the very thing he had deemed worthless. The plot twist wasn't just that I had succeeded. It was that my success was built on the foundation he had ignored, and its revelation struck him at the precise moment it caused him maximum damage, destroying his leverage and his carefully constructed narrative of my dependency. The aftermath of that meeting was swift and decisive. Mark's legal strategy collapsed. His argument that I was incapable of supporting myself, that I had contributed nothing of value, was utterly demolished by the $50 million figure. Suddenly, the court didn't see me as a dependent wife seeking alimony. They saw me as the founder of a valuable, rapidly growing company. The settlement negotiations shifted dramatically. Instead of fighting for a meager share of his empire, I was now negotiating from a position of significant strength, leveraging the value of my own empire. Mark was forced to settle on terms far more favorable to me than he could have ever imagined. He still had his fortune, of course, but he had lost the battle he cared about most, the battle to prove I was nothing without him. The financial details were complex, but the core outcome was simple. I walked away with my business, fully mine, its value undeniable, and a settlement that reflected my new reality, not his old narrative. Leaving that conference room felt surreal. The air outside tasted sweet, clean. I wasn't just leaving a marriage, I was leaving a prison of someone else's making. The woman who walked in, scared and holding on to a desperate hope, was not the same woman who walked out. There was relief, yes, immense relief, exhaustion, deep in my bones, and a cold, quiet satisfaction that settled over me like a mantle. He had tried to break me, to strip me bare, to declare me nothing. But in doing so, he had inadvertently forced me to forge my own path, to build my own strength, to turn the nothing he scorned into something powerful and real. His cruelty was the unexpected fertilizer for my growth. The $50 million number wasn't just money.
It was validation.
It was independence. It was the irrefutable answer to "you have nothing left." It was proof that my quiet passion, my dismissed creativity, had a value he could never comprehend because he wasn't the one who had created it. Building the business continued, of course. It was hard work, but it was my work. Every challenge was a step forward, not a confirmation of worthlessness. The fear never completely goes away, not when you've been told you're nothing and have to fight for every inch. But now it's different. It's a fear of failure, not a fear of being insignificant. There's a quiet pride in that distinction. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm working in my new, spacious office, an office I built in a building I chose, I think about that day in the conference room. I see Mark's face, the moment the mask fell, the raw, animal scream. And I remember the silence that came before it, the silence pregnant with possibility, the silence of a world holding its breath just before it changed irrevocably. He thought he was taking everything. He had no idea he was setting me free to build something far bigger than he could ever dismantle. He left me with nothing, and I turned that nothing into everything. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.